Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I recently read an essay by George Orwell, the British writer best known for his political novels 1984 and Animal Farm, titled Notes on Nationalism. It's rather short and freely available online, so I linked in the description and encourage everyone to pause and take the time to read it before watching the rest of this video. This isn't a review, so the arguments I'm about to make should make sense without reading it, but it was the point of inspiration, and as such, reading it will help put this discussion into proper context. The purpose of Notes on Nationalism is simple. Orwell is attempting to define a phenomenon which he believes is evidently apparent in Western culture, but lacks a term to describe it. As a result, Orwell decides to use the word nationalism, though he explicitly states that he is not using nationalism in the typical sense. He just thinks it's the closest term to what he is trying to get at. Now, many commentators have pointed out that in modern English, the term that Orwell was looking for is tribalism. That is what I believed on my first reading as well, and I do believe that tribalism is a much better fit for what he is trying to get at than nationalism. If Orwell had titled the essay Notes on Tribalism, I think it wouldn't have been quite as disconcerting to read. Nationalism just does not fit some of the concepts he addressed. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to use the term tribalism and not nationalism. Just remember that was not the word Orwell himself used. That said, I still don't think that tribalism really captures the nuances of what Orwell was trying to get at in his essay either. But first I need to define tribalism. As I see it, there are two key aspects of tribal behavior. The first is a strong identification with the tribe. This goes beyond simple agreement, familiarity, or approval of the tribe. It means such internalization of the tribe that it becomes a fundamental aspect of the individual's core identity, meaning that for such an individual, attacks on the tribe are indistinguishable from attacks on the self. The second aspect is unconditional loyalty to the tribe. This means that for the tribal individual, their tribe is always assumed to be acting from a position of moral justification. If an individual is willing to compromise prosperity or prestige of the tribe for some moral or ethical principle, then their behavior is not tribal. Tribalism implies pure power politics. These members of the tribe employ us versus them mentality, and the us will always take precedent over them. Note that this does not mean uncritical loyalty. Members of the tribe may very well be critical or even hostile towards one another, but a true tribalist will still value a fellow member of the tribe, even a factional enemy, above someone not part of the tribe. Now, what constitutes a tribe itself can be quite broad. Nations, ethnic groups, political parties, communities, families, military units, and sports teams are all classic examples of tight-knit groups that can turn, or fundamentally are, tribal. Typically, the fewer members of a tribe there are, the stronger the two aspects discussed will manifest. But it is not always a direct correlation. The real determining factor is to what degree individuals allow the tribe to compromise a portion of their identity. A small recreational sports team that meets once every other week is probably not going to be very tribal in nature, whereas some professional sports teams with international followings most certainly invoke tribal behavior. So it seems like we can construct a clear definition of tribalism. So what is it that Orwell says is different? To start with, Orwell gives three characteristics he sees as intrinsic to tribalism: obsession, instability, and indifference to reality. These can for the most part be derived from the two aspects I've listed. Someone who has allowed a significant part of their identity to be defined by an extrinsic tribal paradigm is going to be almost by definition obsessed with that thing. Instability derives from the power politics of tribal behavior. In this section, Orwell is talking about how tribes could seemingly overnight change their support for some other place, group, idea, or individual, which makes perfect sense if the only concern is what is politically expedient for the tribe in the given moment. In the same vein, an indifference to reality is also a natural result of power politics. Propaganda is a necessary component of the war for prestige, and often tribes will start to believe their own propaganda over time. After discussing these three characteristics, Orwell then breaks tribalism into three varieties: sorting the biggest tribes he saw among the English intellectuals at the time into their appropriate bin. This is where things get interesting, and starts to show the nuances of Orwell's thought. His three varieties of tribalism are positive, transferred, and negative. Positive tribalism is essentially just tribalism as I've so far been defining it. An identifiable group made of individuals who strongly identify with a tribe and work devotedly for its betterment. His next variety, transferred tribalism, is essentially the same thing as positive tribalism. The transferred in the title refers to those individuals who show strong tribalistic tendencies for a group that they are somehow removed from. He mentions how this is usually the result of some idealized view of the tribe in question, a mental construction that often has only a passing resemblance to reality. This phenomenon could also be described as pseudo-tribalism, with all the fixtures of Orwell's positive tribalism, but a purely artificial result of those individuals who seek to reconstruct a tribe that they cannot otherwise be part of. This new tribe could then grow and develop in its own ways, possibly even becoming hostile to the original parent tribe. An interesting concept, but still I do not see this as anything more than a subsection of tribalism as already discussed. No, the true novel concept is Orwell's last variety, negative tribalism. Negative tribalism is an ingenious concept, but is also seemingly obvious. It is a label for such groups and ideologies that seemingly only exist in opposition to some other group or idea. Examples of such movements given by Orwell are the Anglophobes, anti-Semites, and Trotskyists, which Orwell defines loosely as those that are against the Stalin regime. While all of these display the obsession, instability, and indifference to reality that Orwell has already pointed out, they do not, in fact, conform to the definition of tribalism that I laid out. There does not seem to be any issue with my first criteria. Individuals for whom opposition and hatred to some group, idea, or peoples abound throughout history. The fact that Hitler was an anti-Semite, Marx was anti-capitalist, and that Malcolm X for most of his life was anti-white are examples that I do not think need much qualification. But there does seem to be an additional factor at play, an additional characteristic to Orwell's three characteristics that seems to only apply in this so-called negative tribalism. I'm going to refer to this new characteristic as grafting. This comes from this fact that it seems that Orwell's negative tribalism is rarely or possibly never present on its own as a distinct tribe, but instead grafts itself onto some other tribe. Hitler was a Nazi, Marx was a communist, and Malcolm X was Nation of Islam. Their so-called negative tribalism was intrinsically linked to their so-called positive tribalism. I will discuss grafting a bit more in a moment. But first, let us look at my second criteria. This time there is a clear discrepancy between negative tribalism and my own definition of tribalism. I define tribes as being wholly interested in increasing their own power and prestige. That is, power is an end in and of itself. But for Orwell's negative tribes, power is only a means. The destruction of the group, idea, place, or individual that the negative tribe is opposed to is the real end goal of the negative tribe. So Orwell's negative tribalism is incompatible with my own definition of tribalism. But there is obviously something there, which brings us back to the concept of grafting. In some ways, grafting is simply a derivation of the instability attribute that Orwell mentions. But for negative tribes, it has an added dimension. As I've already pointed out, negative tribes are always grafted onto some other form of tribalism. But they are not forced to maintain loyalties to their chosen tribe, and are capable of jumping ship and grafting themselves to a new tribe if it is politically expedient. The last thing that must be mentioned before finally wrapping up everything is that while all of this has been derived from the phenomenon Orwell describes as negative tribalism, I do not think it is purely limited to negative ideologies. Any ideology that results in a segment of people having a fervent belief in some single issue may demonstrate grafting. To try and help explain, let me give an example. In the 1930s in Germany, there was a noted phenomenon referred to as beefsteak Nazis. These were Nazis who were brown on the outside, red on the inside. For those who do not immediately pick up on the political color references, it means individuals who were fascist on the outside, communist or socialist on the inside. The term was used because when the Nazis gained power in Germany, large numbers of communist and other far left partisans decided to join their ranks and proceed to participate in the persecution of their former comrades. The thing is, for an outside observer, they would have all seemed like a clearly tribal communist before they switched sides, and it would have seemed like a clearly tribal fascist after they switched sides. This is clearly in violation of my definition of tribalism, so how to explain it? In short, grafting. These were individuals who were never tribal towards some particular group, but some particular idea, be it revolutionary socialism, anti-Semitism, authoritarianism, or something else. When they believed that being a tribal communist was the best way to forward their particular ideology, they were a tribal communist. When fascism grew into power and they saw their chosen ideology grafted onto it, they switched affiliations and became a tribal fascist. So now that we have covered everything, I think it is possible to derive two distinct forms of tribalism: structured tribalism and ideological tribalism. Structural tribalism is just tribalism according to the two aspects I laid out in exhibiting the three characteristics that Orwell described. Ideological tribalism is what we were just discussing. It is quite similar, but with a few differences. The first of my two aspects remains the same, but the second is changed because those who exhibit ideological tribalism are not seeking power for the benefit of some specific group, but to achieve some specific ideological end. Also, in addition to Orwell's three characteristics, ideological tribalism also exhibits the characteristic of grafting. It can be hard to differentiate between structural and ideological tribalism. For example, a given political movement may have both types of tribalism within it. The key difference is that the structural tribalist will always support the tribe no matter what, whereas the ideological tribalist will only continue to do so as long as it remains a politically expedient way to forward their ideology. In either form, tribalism is rarely a beneficial force. The three attributes that Orwell attaches to it are certainly not things we want to encourage more of in society. While it is true that single-minded devotion to a cause may be a catalyst for great change, it often results in destruction of many worthwhile things in the process. When two tribes end up squarely in opposition to one another, neither side ceding ground until the other is destroyed or broken is particularly detrimental, and if the tribes in question are large enough, can completely destabilize the society. As such, it is important to be able to recognize tribalism in its various forms. While the mitigation and prevention of tribalism are thus important, they are topics well beyond the scope of this video. But being able to identify tribalism is the first step to dealing with it, so I believe that the information that I presented today is of some worth. As always, thank you for watching. I've been on a bit of a hiatus, but I should be posting content regularly again for at least the foreseeable future. I'm still quite small, so if you like what I do, please consider sharing this to one of my other videos, as well as liking and making a comment. I post these videos on a number of different video hosting sites, so if you're on YouTube right now, I suggest checking out the attached links. Not all of my content ends up on YouTube because of some of their more draconian policies. I also have a Getter, link below, where I post about new content, so please consider following me there. Lastly, if you have not already read the Orwell article that inspired this video, I would encourage you to check it out and give it a read. As before, the link is in the description. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.